All right. Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Cabin on the Rocks podcast. This is your host, Tony Anderson, singer, songwriter, musician, a.k.a. Fast Tony. Please help welcome my very first guest to the Cabin on the Rocks podcast, owner of Ghostnotes Vintage Drums, vintage Ludwig collector, Danny Rivera. Danny, how are you?
Pretty good. How are you guys? I hope everyone's well.
Excellent, excellent. We're stoked to have you on the show today, and really looking forward to explaining a little bit more for those who aren't drummers, just what makes vintage Ludwig drums so spectacular. And I've got a couple basic questions and basic notes, but you'll be able to probably expound on it much better than I would, because not being a drummer, not an expert, but you certainly are, I would say. For those that don't know, the Ludwig brand itself, I guess it started at the turn of the century, 1909. A couple brothers, they make the first bass drum pedal, and they're ultimately lead into be a subsidiary of Selmer, which is a big maker of, I think, largely student instrument brass, cornets, trumpets, tubas, trombones and stuff. I think they didn't merge with Kahn until the 50s, and looks like William Ludwig retired in the 1980s, and Ludwig got sold outright to Selmer. And in the early 2000s, they finally merged with Kahn and Selmer, and that's a little of the background there of the brothers, who I believe they're of German ancestry, Ludwig and Ludwig. So I want to ask you right off the top of my head, as a drummer yourself, what is it about Ludwig drums, first of all, that is the main attraction that you think puts Ludwig in a class by itself?
Yeah, well, I've always been attracted to them because of the very beginnings of the actual modern drum set at the turn of the century. Most at that time, we're talking vaudeville and, a lot of theaters, and before the invention really of, just the modern drum kit. Now, when they say the modern drum kit at the turn of the century, at that time, people were making bass drum pedals were not a thing yet. You had three drummers in the pit orchestra that would do sound effects, and one would play bass drum, one would play cymbals only, and would play snare drum.
Interesting.
And so at that time, in order to facilitate the room, because there was, it's theaters were being built, and people were just being spread around. It was there wasn't any sound really yet. It was all just acting and stuff. So what happens is there was really a demand for a pedal, and there was people making homemade type pedals and stuff out of wood and stuff like that. These guys took a kind of they did their own design and just really handmade everything. And they were some of the first ones to have the bass drum pedal just come to what it is.
Yeah.
So people, once Theobald and William Ludwig Sr. Designed the pedal, they had a small farmhouse. I think it's 1620 North Lincoln in Chicago was the address, and it was a small, tiny little shack, and they kind of every drummer from all the Midwest and the East Coast started demanding, hey, where do I get one of these? And these guys just started making them. But at that same time, there were also drummers themselves, so they would manufacture what they could and then go out and play and just kind of show everybody their new design.
Amazing.
So I think it's just because of the beginnings of the drum set, and them being pioneers to that is what really attracts me most than anything. Got
it. So I'm gonna jump around a little bit, but that's cool. That's some cool information. I mean, just pre electricity, pre PA. So and the drum would be a big part of what's a loud acoustic instrument for unamplified theater. So these keystone badges indicate on the drums. It's a small little, almost like I don't want to call it like a bow tie shaped design or what it is, but it's called the Keystone badge. It's on almost all the vintage Ludwigs. And does that primarily indicate a drum made in the 60s?
Well, no, not necessarily. They actually started using the Keystone badge in the 40s.
Okay.
From what I recall, and other, the Ludwig book is it's a publication by a company called Rebeats, and they're out of Chicago as well.
Yep. They
started printing that book around the early 2000s, and I got a hold of a copy.
Okay.
And it has a lot of information in there, and that also indicates that right as they came back from the war, there was war rations and stuff. So
right.
Once they came back, they started using the Keystone badge. It was made out of aluminum at first, the first year and a half, and then they started using the brass Keystone badges. So they've been around since the 40s.
Okay.
But yes, they still use the Keystone badge to this day. It's just a larger, more modern version.
So it definitely predates the 60s. And I had a note that's on here about a blue and olive badge indicates a drum made in the 70s or the 80s. And it said the blue and olive badge replaced this Keystone in somewhere around 1969.
Yes. During 1969, I owned multiple drum sets of that.
Uh-huh.
I'm partial to the Keystone. To me, it looks classier. I know to some guys, the 70s reminds them of their childhood, and they just kind of go after those drums. I think they're just bigger badges and just kind of don't. I guess I'm a purist or old-fashioned in that way. I'm just so used to seeing the Keystone badge. So most of the drums that I collect are all Keystone badge drums.
Yeah.
I have very few blue olive drums. So
Is there a particular decade or year that you have more of than others, that you look for more than others, that's like your preferred?
I have some of the first run of drums from 1912.
Okay. Wow.
I've sought out some pretty special, pretty limited run type drums, and these are obviously they're over 100 years old, so they're really hard to find, especially all intact.
Wow.
Some of them have been dropped or repainted, or some of the hoops are missing or the badge is missing. So I try and find the stuff out there that's pretty rare, but it's also you might find one year and it might take you 12 years to find the next one. So
right. Wow.
It's when it's out there, I would say go out and grab it.
Treasure hunt
for sure.
Oh,
Treasure hunt for sure. It's been a wild ride considering how many drums are out there. You would think, well, drum sets, they made thousands and millions and hundreds of thousands each manufacturer, but not so much. Ludwig was very particular about the stuff they put out. Fast forward to the 60s, once the Ringo craze happened, they had shifts 24 hours a day.
Yeah.
As opposed to a 9 to 5 like before that. And that was a wild time for Ludwig.
Right. Yeah.
So,
that totally blasted their
mystique, and just them being pioneers is just a main thing for me.
Yeah. Going back, touching on what you were saying about during the war in the 40s, due to a shortage of materials, Ludwig started producing drums made almost entirely from wooden parts because they needed the metal and I guess aluminum for other things. It's hoops, lugs, wood. So I'm sure you have some of that in your collections. These drums.
I do. They're called Victory drums from that era.
Okay.
They're Leedy, Ludwig. They were all under the umbrella of the bigger company. So each line had their own. They had like the Victorious line, or they had like the Victory line, and it was always kind of they named it after obviously Victory. So towards the war, towards the U.S., the Allied forces having victory over world domination type countries. So, they had to ration all their metals and all that for the war effort.
Yeah. Do you personally think the quality and the sound went down, or it was not as good when it was more wood being used than metal in those Victory drums or that series? Or
I think the shell construction was the same. It was 3-ply. I believe it was. I mean, they used different stuff back then. It was maple, poplar, maple, or mahogany, poplar, mahogany. It just with reinforcement hoops, and so the shell construction was basically the same, but.
Okay.
What they rationed was the outside, the lugs and the rims and all that. So the lugs were made of wood as well, with metal inserts, and the rims were made of wood instead of brass. So all that stuff, obviously went to the war effort, and then that's how they manufactured stuff for those few years.
Right.
And during those few years, there wasn't much manufacturing as well because they kind of how could I say this? Their manufacturing kind of redirected to helping again the war effort. So
Yeah. Wow.
partially, some of their factory was actually used for making ammunitions and different stuff like that.
In Chicago.
If guys wanted to play drums, they would just use pre-war drums and just kind of go with that until
right.
Until everything, I guess, kind of went back to normal.
So there is actually pre-badge Ludwig drums? That's a thing, right?
Well, Ludwig has always had badges. The only drums that did not come with badges were metal drums in the 20s.
Okay.
But those came with an engraving or a stamp.
Okay.
And but the wood drums did come with badges. They're round brass badges, and that was through the 20s, going into the 30s, and towards the late 30s, they used a round badge, but it was a white enamel badge, is what they call.
Gotcha.
They called that, and from there, they just different variations of badges. I think they've had somewhere around 15 to 20 different type badges, and I actually have most all of them.
Fantastic. I love that.
I've just
yes. Yeah. Ludwig knows who Danny Rivera and Ghostnotes Vintage Drums is.
Oh yeah, well they've actually, I know a few representatives and a few ex-employees that were artist relations guys, and they know my collection. They've actually have written me a letter asking if they could use one of the drums to try and spec it after something that they want to reissue.
Wow.
Which is 100-year-old drum, some of their first run stuff. So
oh my gosh,
I may do that. Yeah, to send it to them so that they can take a look at it, measure it, and try to manufacture something close to it.
Yeah.
So it's my pleasure to help them out, of course.
That's really cool. Yeah, isn't it true? Yeah. I thought you were telling me a story about 1 year at the NAMM convention, big music industry equipment, gear, instrument.
I love Ludwig drums, but I collect a couple of other drums as well. So I'm a big Gretsch guy, and I love Gretsch drums from the 50s and 60s. They have to me, all the early vaudeville stuff was all Ludwig, and I love all that stuff from the 20s and 30s and into the 40s. Once we get into the 50s, I definitely still love all the Ludwig stuff, but I love jazz as well. And during that era, jazz guys really kind of started focusing their attention on Gretsch drums.
Okay.
Gretsch had a office in New York, and they also had a manufacturing, in New York. So all the guys, when they'd come to New York and play all the clubs like Birdland and all those other places, Gretsch would give them drum sets to use. So I also collect Gretsch, and what happens is for NAMM show about 4 years ago, they professional drum shop here in Hollywood was called by Remo, drumhead manufacturer here in California, who's been around since the 50s. They're one of the first drum companies to create the all-weather drumhead, which was new for everybody, but it was a plastic drumhead because prior to that, everyone used calf heads. And with calf heads, you got to have a heater, and with different temperature changes in rooms, it would tune and all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
So nevertheless, fast forward about 4 years ago, Remo contacted Pro Drum for a replica drum set to something that Max Roach would have used.
Oh, okay.
And I happen to have an absolute spot-on replica, so I let them use that. And that was a for a premiere of classic drum heads, which are now world-renowned for any older drums that you may have because of the sizing that they used back then. Sometimes they would because it was 6-ply versus 3-ply. The actual shell was a little bit different. So nowadays, when you try and buy modern heads for those old drums, they just fit tight and they just don't fit very well. Some of these drums have been not very well taken care of. So with temperature changes, they come out of round and that kind of stuff. So, people were trying, there was a big demand for drum heads like that. So nevertheless, they contacted them. They didn't, Pro Drum, unfortunately, is not the same Pro Drum that was around, the 50s and 60s. They had, every drum set you can imagine. Nowadays, they sell more modern drums. So they did not have a drum that they could supply. So they called me, and I ended up giving them something that they definitely liked.
Yeah.
So that was a great experience with them.
That's pretty cool that Ludwig actually approached you for, some replica or, an example of a model that they didn't even have in their arsenal, in their old inventory, which is really cool.
I was surprised that they did that. I was actually surprised that they didn't have a copy of their own stuff. That's strange to me, but I guess it happens.
Yeah. In the 1920s, this is when Ludwig produces the first Black Beauty snare drum model. Why are these such sought-after industry standard choice for drummers for both live and studio performances?
I think the mystique with the Black Beauty is just it's a beautiful drum. I mean, it's hand engraved by some of by artisans from back then, and the engraving varies from year to year. And some are more sought after than others, and also depending on condition and size, originality, and just if it comes with its original box, original heads, that kind of stuff.
I see. And they still making?
They are sought after.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Are they still making them today? Black Beauties?
They are making them today, but the manufacturing process has changed quite a bit. Today, it's a seamless brass shell that's spun, and it's the bearing edges are not the same as the 1920s or 30s drums. The 1920s and 30s drums, the bearing edges were they were soldered and folded back. So you have a canal. Okay. A cavity, if you want to call it, that goes around each bearing edge. And sound engineers, drummers, collectors, players, they've all agreed that that was the best example of the Black Beauty. So to this day, professional drummers always look for those drums. They just have a particular sound to them it's very crisp and very military type sounding drum, very dry, and it's good for orchestral use and whatnot. So modern drummers nowadays, they use obviously an arsenal of snare drums, but that's one of the drums that most guys want to have in their arsenal. Right. The Black Beauty shell is it's a very sound. How can I say this? It's got its own particular sound, but that shell in itself, it doesn't necessarily have to be black and engraved. That shell was used with nickel over brass shells. That same shell construction was used until about the 40s. Okay. So whether it was a Black Beauty or not, most of the metal drums were like that, made of that same type of process.
And is Black Beauty, would you say, is the longest running model of Ludwig drums?
You know what? As a matter of fact, I would say yes. I would say yes, considering when it premiered, that early back. But
from the 20s,
most would argue that the most recorded drum. I'm sorry.
That would be 100-year run. If it started in the 20s, we're in 2000.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah. I think the first Black Beauties were actually prior to the 20s. I think they were like 1916 or 1918, something like that. Wow. So, but it is the longest run model that they've ever made.
Yeah.
So, I love that drum.
I'm not going to ask you to give up all your secrets, but is there a particular decade of Black Beauties that you prefer over another, like the 30s or the 40s or the 50s or something? Or are they all, you know?
Oh, I definitely. Well, the Black Beauty disappeared after, I would say, around war. Once the war came and went, they just kind of stopped manufacturing it. And they went into different models. They went into different designs with lugs. They did the Zephyr lug. They did their airline lug.
Uh-huh.
They did the Imperial lug was premiering at that time, and that's what they actually use to this day on Superphonics. And that's what I was going to say earlier. The Black Beauty may be the longest run model that Ludwig made, but the most popular model that was attainable by any musician, including a student or teacher or anybody like that, is the Superphonic.
Okay.
The Superphonic is arguably the most recorded drum on record. Yeah,
Really?
It's on almost every record that you could think of. So, that's, and that design also, changed a little bit as well. The Superphonics from 1959 they were called the Super Ludwig 400. From 1958 to 1960, they were manufactured, and in about 63, it started changing. They changed the shell construction. The bearing edge was a little different, and it turned from brass to aluminum, spun aluminum, and the sound changed a little bit. But every drummer had one at that time.
Uh-huh.
They had to have one.
Right.
And that was standard equipment on a Ludwig drum set as well. When you bought a drum set, that's the snare drum that came with it.
Yeah, I've admired your photos of all these different drums. You do an amazing job with refurbishing and restoring. People don't know probably, but I've been friends with Danny for years. We worked together at SIR Studios in Hollywood a long time ago. It seems like another lifetime, but just fantastic to.
Oh gosh, yeah.
Fantastic to connect with you in those halls, and be on the rock and roll front line over there with you. It's pretty exciting. You take these drums apart and basically just make them. It's like someone would take a car from the 50s and just restore it, and it's amazing to see what these kits turn into. They just come back looking just insane. These finishes, these oyster pearl finishes, these wraps, are they actually wraps around the wood shells, or you want to talk a little bit about?
Yeah, they are actually. Well, Ludwig at that time would actually, they would lay the way they made the shells, they would lay the plywood flat, and then they would glue the wrap flat on top of it, and then they would mold the drum to make it round. So the way that these wraps are, they lap into the seam.
Yeah.
For once it's rounded, it laps inside itself. So
I see.
That's a telltale sign that's it's a genuine wrap. Some guys will go ahead and try and rewrap stuff. And it's just never the same. It's only original one time.
Right. Wow.
I try and look for those drums.
Mm-hmm. That's a cool tip.
And also sourcing parts is a big deal too. You mentioned restoration. I mean, you have to use the right stuff on the right shells so that you don't take away the integrity of it. You can't put it on the buffing wheel too hard because with heat it can eat into the wrap itself.
Right.
The lugs have to be shined a certain way. So I have a machine that I put everything in that kind of it works with electrodes and stuff. So it kind of it takes off all the tarnish and all the patina that's built up on there and makes everything look it's a metal cleaner really is what it is, and it makes everything look almost like new.
Yeah.
And then sourcing the part is a tough thing too, because you want to make sure you get everything era correct.
Yeah.
When you resell them, people want original.
Yeah,
so
they care about that.
That's
right. They don't want to mix and match. It's not like there's a factory out there fabricating 1960s Ludwig lugs or pieces that you really got to go, and it's like going to a junkyard almost. these days, I guess you're doing it kind
Well,
of
yeah, I
virtually.
mean, there's guys that in the circle of collectors that I've come across the last 20 plus years doing this. You get a network of people that you know which guy has certain things. Like this is my hoop guy, or this is my 1930s and 40s hardware guy, and this is my guy who does only bearing edges that'll do he'll do exactly. I mean, I don't like to touch bearing edges myself because again they're only original one time.
Yep. Yep.
But if there's something that's very rare that needs work, that absolutely has to be spot on factory, I use certain guys that will go ahead and restore that particular bearing edge to original factory spec.
That's fantastic.
So finding the right people and having a network of people really helps.
Yeah. And this actual oyster pearl description that is real common that you'd see. It's going to sound stupid, but I'll just say it as a layman and say, so they actually took oyster shells and like broke them down to get the iridescent coloring, and that's how they got.
I'm not totally sure if that's the case. I've heard different stories. Through different collectors and different people that were at that time were young men. Doing it. In the 70s and 60s, but really there was a manufacturer in Italy that would do all the pearl finishes, the oyster finishes. Okay. And what they would do is they would lay out sheets of plastic and they would do I don't exactly know what the process was to get the actual, to make it look like the iridescence and all that. But I remember someone telling me that they would put the finish on the plastic and then they would rake everything with different rakes, and they would create that effect. And they only did that with 3 different finishes, which is the black oyster, the most popular one that Ringo made popular. Yes. And then there's a beautiful blue oyster that looks like abalone and stuff like that. And then there's the real super rare pink oyster, which I like to collect and specialize in. Yeah, they're amazing. So,
where can people see?
And those are the basic 3 oyster finishes.
I love that. And I want to tell our listeners right now where they can see a lot of your vintage Ludwig drums that you've restored and have displayed. Your Instagram is?
It's Ghostnotes Vintage Drums.
Ghostnotes plural.
And you can look for me there. I try and post as many as I can for different examples.
Is Ghostnotes plural, or is it?
Yes, Ghostnotes plural, Vintage Drums.
Okay, at Instagram. Okay, and if somebody wanted to shoot you an email if they're not on Instagram? Yeah,
they can shoot me directly at xdannyrivera@gmail.com.
Okay.
And give me a day or a day or a few hours, and I usually try and respond as quickly as I can.
Yeah.
And I get clients from all over the world asking me for different stuff. Guys ask me for parts.
Yeah.
Or they'll say, "Hey, I got a 1940s floor tom with no legs. Do you have any?" Right. And then that's when I start asking some real nitty gritty questions like, "Well, send me pictures of your floor tom. Let me take a look at the era. Let me take a look at what lugs are on there. Let me see if your drum even is needed with floor toms." Because back then hardware was also not as common. Some drums came with what they call a cradle, which is a 3-legged basket type stand,
right?
Where you would just sit the floor tom on there, and that's how you play it.
Wow.
Drum thrones were not easily accessible at that time. People would just play on chairs, so hardware was just kind of coming around as well at that time.
That's classic.
So when people call me or email me for that, I try and accommodate as best I can.
Yeah, and you do. This the Ringo kit. Speaking of the Ringo kit and the Black Oyster Pearl, was it 1964, and they call it the Super Classic. Is that about right?
Yes, that is right. He played 2 different sets actually. The downbeat is the smaller set.
Okay.
The Super Classic is the bigger set.
All right.
And the Super Classic contains a 13-inch tom, a 16-inch floor tom, and a 22-inch bass drum.
All right.
The downbeat contains a 12-inch tom, 14-inch floor tom, 20-inch bass drum. So he went back and forth with those two. And so I think guys, collectors and fans try and go after trying to find, both. And
Yeah.
although there was a craze with Black Oyster,
Uh-huh.
they are particularly hard to find. Reason why people just they bought them and they save them. They just put them away.
Got it.
And so in circulation, there's really not too many, unfortunately.
Is this
but
like these?
when they pop up, I try and grab a few.
Gotcha. Yeah. Wow. It's just like these. We talked about this in the industry with these, exotic, 59 Gibson Les Pauls, like in these guitar vaults in Japan, where they just have these safes where they just put them. So you probably find a lot of these Black Oyster Ringo kits over there too.
Yes, there's a lot of collectors in Japan. I've actually been contacted by quite a few, and I deal with some of them as much as I can. It's difficult with shipping, and it's difficult with customs and sending stuff out there and all that. So it's not as easy as keeping them in circulation in the U.S.
Right.
A lot of guys in Europe ask me for a lot of stuff as well. So shipping's always a hot or cold. It's never easy.
Yeah, yeah. So if the 64 is around the first year the Ringo kit gets produced, is there a cutoff line when they're like, okay, that's the last Ringo kit? Is it the 80s or?
No, they made them up until that style of drum they made until, or that particular finish they made until about 1969, 1970, and it kind of changes from there. They did another version of the Black Oyster and Blue Oyster. They call it the bowling ball.
Okay.
It's more of it looks more of a countertop-ish Formica kind of finish.
Yeah.
I think that maybe Ludwig at that time had experienced some sort of supply chain breakdown with the manufacturer that did all the wraps.
Okay.
So I think that at that time it was easier for them to get a hold of wraps here in the U.S. So everything kind of changed at around 1970. So, but to touch back on the Black Oyster thing, I actually have a 1956 WFL, which is before Ludwig bought its name back and put Ludwig on the actual badge. The badge would say WFL Drum Company. So I have actually one of the first run Black Oyster kits made in the 50s.
Wow.
Before the Ringo craze.
Holy moly.
So it's
I didn't know that.
With collecting, it's all these little intricacies, right? So it's like knowing what year and what month and all that kind of stuff. So it gets really intense trying to find that stuff.
Wow. That's really cool. I didn't know that about the Ringo kit. It's almost like they had the workings of the Ringo kit. They knew what was a really good drum. I mean, obviously that's probably, it just, it wasn't called the Ringo kit when Ringo picked it out and got it, but he pretty much took over the name with the craze of the Beatles. And like, maybe want to talk about for a second, just the effect the Beatles had and Ringo on Ludwig drums.
Oh yeah. Well, it was the biggest band in the world at that moment, and people were just going crazy, and they just wanted whatever, connection they could have to those guys, So every drummer, jazz was out the window. It was all about rock and roll. You know what I mean? So, again, I think I might have mentioned it earlier. Ludwig just, they had a 9-to-5 shift. There were Union, there were, Chicago, and from there it just exploded to 24-hour shifts. And
wow.
The quality control changed a little bit, the earlier stuff before 1960, the insides of the shells were not painted. They were just natural mahogany. From that point on, I think for imperfections and how quickly they needed to basically, put out all these drums, they started painting the insides and just stamping them with dates and trying to manufacture and put out sets as quickly as they could. The demand was so high.
Yeah. What I got to ask you, if you want to mention, what's your greatest Ludwig find to date?
That's a good question. They all have their own special, story, or every drum that I take. I mean, I've met people in parking lots and handed them over $1,000 cash, and then they'll open their trunk, and then all of a sudden it's a 1929 one-piece mahogany or walnut. I'm actually looking at it right now. Round badge, brass, Super Ludwig drum, super sensitive. And I thought that was really cool. I mean, that's one story. I mean, there's other stuff where guys have said, hey, I have this old drum set, and I'll get there, and it's probably tattered or painted and just horrible. He goes, but look, I have this snare drum came with it, and it'll be like a Super Ludwig that's, it's probably worth $1,500. And I'll tell, and the guy's like, look, give me $300 for the whole set, including the snare drum. And I feel bad. I mean, I'm like, look, you're giving me are you sure you want to do this? And he's like, look, I don't mind. Here you go. I'd rather go to a good home, and instead of $300, I might slide the guy, a couple, $500 just for guilt's sake. But yeah, I found some pretty special drums. I found a Pink Oyster drum set at a drum shop in Maine, in the state of Maine, and it came from Canada. And it happens to be a 1959 Pink Oyster drum set. That's super rare. It's a New Yorker, which is a shallower bass drum, and that kind of stuff is not found, just anywhere. I mean, guys have been after this particular drum set for years, and I just won't let it go just yet, and at some point, but not just yet. And a lot of other little stuff that comes with those finds are, old bass drum pedals or Charleston pedals or low boys, which is the hi-hat, but it was on the floor. This is before you could, before they invented the hi-hat, basically it was called a low boy, and it's a pair of hi-hats that are on the floor. So it's, you find all kinds of weird stuff. And, so I think, one of my greatest finds also was a walnut Ludwig that was only manufactured for 2 years, and funny story, I was bidding against this guy like 10 years ago on 2 tom-toms. I ended up winning the bass drum. He ended up getting the toms. So we were, at that time I didn't know who got it or what. And then fast forward up until last year, I posted the bass drum on a Ludwig collector forum on Facebook, and of all things. And the guy happened to reach out to me and say, hey, I have the toms to that drum set. So I ended up acquiring the toms, and I put the drum set together, and they all match. And
oh my gosh,
it's stories like that. Things come together. You might have to wait 10 years, but who's got 10 years to wait on a drum set, right? Apparently I do. So but it works out in the end. You just got to be patient.
That's so cool. For those people that, even though Facebook owns Instagram, if people, is there a Ghost Notes on Facebook too?
There's a whole page on Facebook. I post a lot of things on Facebook because of the fact that I've moved to Instagram for myself and all that kind of stuff, but some of the older collectors are kind of, everyone is Johnny come lately, I guess. So they all have Facebook accounts now the last 5 years, so they're all on there.
Yeah.
And so I do that for business sake and to keep them in the loop and stuff. But I always tell them, hey, why don't you come over to Instagram so you can get more stuff. So
I see.
Some of these gentlemen are in their 70s, you gotta, and that's, they're great guys. They just, they're just a little behind the curve on the digital age, I guess.
I see. So I guess you can search Ghost Notes on Facebook, and if you want to look, but if you want the most up-to-date, current, what's going on, Instagram is the place to go see you.
That is correct. Yes, sir.
Gotcha. So that's really cool. This is pretty fascinating, and glad to get all these details here from you about these amazing drums. And is there anything that you've been looking for that Ludwig produced you haven't been able to find? I mean, what's your dream Ludwig find?
I have I've looked and have found quite a bit of Galaxy Sparkle drums.
What year?
They're some of my favorite drums. It's a black wrap drum set that has blue, green, red and pink sparkles in it, so it looks like space, really, kind of.
Oh, okay.
And I've collected those over the years. The hardest thing with those is,
Is that a '60s drum? Is that
yes, it's a 1960s Keystone drum,
okay?
and I think they made them between 63 and 68 or something like that. And the hardest part with those things is just you can't, people played these drums. No, back then nobody thought, oh, these are going to be worth some money or they're going to be collectible or anything like that. So people would just take these things out and play them.
Right.
Case in point, look at Michael Shrive with Carlos Santana in 1969 playing a day gig, and it's a Champagne Sparkle.
Uh-huh.
I personally would never take out a Champagne Sparkle in the sun, but back then no one thought of these things as vintage drums. They were just drums, you know.
Right.
So some of that sparkle and some of that oyster tint and some of those colors tend to, with sun rays, they just tend to disappear
Yeah.
and dull and fade and all that. So really finding drums is really like in the condition, you know what I mean, is what I look for as well. It's not just the actual drum itself. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. And we know how it goes with musical equipment. It's like a couple tours is like equal to going through a couple tours of battle.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. No, they can be road worn and then they're less desirable. I mean, I like to call those players, and there's guys that just want that, they just want something that they can play, although they may want something that's cool looking or whatever to them, you know what I mean? I tend to sell a couple of those every now and then, but most of my collection and most of the stuff that I look for, I try and find, the best examples that I possibly can.
Yeah.
Because my clients are the type of people that are, a lot of them are studio guys, a lot of them are drummers that you and I both know, or have been on records that we all have listened to, and it's amazing to see how many people really I have met in the community, in the drum community that, I thought I would never have met otherwise, you know what I mean? So it's great to be a part of this.
Yeah.
I'm passing on instruments, to people that really will use them and will be on records, and I'm pretty proud of that.
Yeah.
If I could help, that's what I'm here for.
You spread a huge net around these instruments that you totally love and care for, and you've brought them together, under your care and, restoring them to just, almost pretty much factory condition. Yet this is a 50, 60, 70-year-old drum or drums, and someone has the pleasure to benefit from all your due diligence and hard work and looking for the drums and taking all the care to put them back into the proper condition so they just actually can go into service on a live performance or a record. It sounds fantastic. Who's some of the famous drummers who played Ludwig? Who can we? I mean, it's such a top of the pyramid brand, but I mean. Who are some of your favorite drummers who played Ludwig, and talk about maybe some of the biggest, most famous drummers?
Well, Buddy Rich was one of the earliest endorsers of Ludwig drums. He was called Kid Traps, and at the time it was short for a contraption, because that's what they called the drum set. It was a contraption. So Kid Traps, and he must have been, I'm talking about 1927. He was probably 5 years old playing drums. And what Ludwig did is every year that he'd grow, they would just make a bigger bass drum, because the whole shtick to his showmanship was there was this little kid behind this bass drum doing all these snare rolls and playing the bass drum, but you couldn't see, all you could see is the top of his head, just the hair.
Wow.
So people were attracted to that. So he's probably one of the most famous endorsers, because he did play Ludwig until his death in 77, I think it was, or 78.
He was a kid in the beginning. You said he started out as a kid. He was playing.
Oh yeah, he started out as a kid and played all through the late 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and into the 70s. Yeah, I think it was 1980. I'm not quite sure when his death happened. I'm so bad about that. I'm sorry about that.
Oh no, hey, it's fine.
But he's probably one of the most famous, and then we can go on from there. Then of course, you got Ringo, you got Bonham from Led Zeppelin, you got You got Alex Van Halen. He played
Oh,
Ludwig. I mean,
yeah.
there was just so many guys that where
Uh-huh.
Ludwig just got passed on. And if you were a kid growing up in America, you wanted Ludwig drums. I mean, now a lot of guys liked Camco and Leedy and all these other Rogers and just all these different manufacturers. But in all honesty, Ludwig was probably the one most kids wanted.
Yeah.
I'm attracted to them just because of their manufacturing process, the wraps that they put out, the different changes in, they're inventing the bass drum pedal, inventing, you know, just their different manufacturing process and different in the metals and the wood snare drums, including the trap drums and stuff.
You're mentioning the bass drum pedals. 1938 is, I think, when Ludwig produces the Speed King bass drum pedal. So,
I believe so, yeah, and I have a different version of that. You're right. They did do a couple different pedals until they came to the Speed King. The Speed King is a very famous pedal as well. Uh, it's probably one of the most played pedals as well. I mean, as a kid, that was the first pedal I ever had and I looked at, and it's got a particular squeak. Even on Led Zeppelin albums, you can hear a squeak in some of their recordings, and that's just a thing that Ludwig had.
yeah.
The way they manufactured the twin springs, and really nowadays you have to take the pedal apart and clean out all the old grease and put in new, grease in order to make them come back to life. But
Yeah.
that's a whole process in itself. But those are great pedals. Some guys swear by them and never play anything else. And every manufacturer at that time had some sort of version, but these guys were the guys that really did it first. So I've kind of stuck to that.
Yeah. And when people with John Bonham, the Vistalite clear colored, blue, orange.
Oh yeah. Yeah, he made the amber Vistalites famous because I think that was his particular color that he chose to play. I myself don't own any amber Vistalites. I own one Vistalite right now, and it's a green Vistalite. And green was the least manufactured of all of them. Of course, I tend to go for the rare stuff. And so I got a hold of a green drum set, and it's a great kit. It sounds awesome. They're really loud drums.
They are.
Ludwig also, another set that he played was a stainless steel set, which is also another loud set. I think that's one of the last sets he played was a stainless steel.
Yeah.
And Ludwig pioneered those two.
Yeah, he's like the only rock drummer with not only, but he'll have the timpani up there in his kit.
Oh yeah. Well, then that timpani, I have pictures of that timpani with a big SIR sticker on the side of it. So there's that.
Oh boy. Oh yeah.
We've.
Yeah, I can't get away from that logo. My favorite videos, there was a Bob Dylan in the 1970s. Boom, it pops up. Or here's this case backstage. There it is.
It's got the big trumpet on there and all that.
Yeah. Its legend precedes itself.
Exactly. Well, that's the connection you and I have. I mean, that place has been around for a while, so it's good luck to them and all that. And that's where we met, so that was a positive, So
talk about pioneers. They were pioneers in the rehearsal and live performance musical rental business.
Oh yeah. Many companies came after that because of those guys doing it first, So.
Yeah. It was a great education going through those halls there. The years we were there.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, and also, I ended up really, because of that place, I ended up, branching out and meeting a lot of people with studios and guys that do drum repair, and I ended up sourcing a few things from that era. So it's it was a good time, it was a good young time for me. It's a good learning experience, but you live and you learn, you move on, and you kind of evolve from that, and that's where all this came from. I mean, this collection has gotten out of control to the point where now I have a brick and mortar, and that's going to be at 5616 West Pico Boulevard in Los Angeles.
Okay.
Of course, it's appointment only for now, but we'll it's not really a drum shop, it's more of a drum showroom.
Okay.
And if you'd like to check it out, again, you can email me at xdannyrivera@gmail.com, and then we can work out an appointment schedule and hopefully come down and see some pretty rare drums. And you can, there's lots of stuff for sale as well. So.
Very cool. And the message through Instagram again is at Ghostnotes Vintage Drums, or what's the actual the whole Instagram name again is?
Ghostnotes Vintage Drums. Yeah.
Okay. Very good. That's
and
so
you can
cool.
also look for me. You can always type in Danny. You can also type in Danny Rivera, and it should pop up right away.
Yeah.
You know?
And Rivera, Rivera.
Yes, sir. That's correct.
That's awesome. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to sit down and talk with us here on the Cabin on the Rocks podcast. Talk all about this amazing work that you're doing and collection that you have, and love and curatorship and just everything you're doing with Ludwig and helping people out, not only in the music industry in Los Angeles, but around the world and around the country with coming after such sought after collectible pieces of art, really, that you've been restoring here. So.
Thank you. Oh, absolutely. And I truly think they are pieces of art. And thanks for saying that. That's absolutely true. Thank you.
Everybody, be sure to go over and check out Danny's Instagram and get to know a little bit more about these amazing drums and all these just really cool different finishes and things and models that they put out. It's really impressive. I'd like to give a shout out and a thank you to all you who have tuned in and joined us today, either at the website directly, cabin-podcast.com, or perhaps you're listening from your favorite streaming platform that hosts podcasts. You can go to the website, cabin-podcast.com, if you want to find out a little bit more about your host here, Tony Anderson, a.k.a. Fast Tony. There's a rather lengthy bio there. It gives some of my background, as well as a full line list of links at the very bottom of the page, homepage there, links to a lot of my music catalog. If you'd like to just search it out directly, you can take a look and listen to the latest single, Blanket of Stars. Just be sure to search Tony Anderson, Blanket of Stars, or Tony Anderson, Sierra Cabin Recordings, or Tony Anderson, the Tony Anderson Anthology, 1993 to 2017. And there's other collections and compilations and singles as well. But thanks so much again for stopping in, everybody. And please sign up and hit subscribe if you'd like to get future episodes of the podcast pushed and alerted through to your preferred choice of platform that you like to listen. All right. Thanks so much, and have a terrific day. All right. Say so, what say so?